My name is Sabrina Steele, I'm 41, and the last time my sister looked at me without contempt, she was borrowing my favorite cashmere sweater to impress a boy who would later break her heart. She always knew how to take what was mine and make it her own. Tonight, she was wearing white. Genevieve's wedding was exactly the spectacle she had always dreamed of: extravagant, flawless, and nauseatingly expensive. The ballroom of the city's most exclusive country club was bathed in cream and gold, from the cascading bouquets of imported roses to the tiny, foil-wrapped chocolates stamped with her and the groom's initials. It was a performance meticulously orchestrated to broadcast success, wealth, and, above all, superiority. Her superiority. I was seated at a table in the far corner of the ballroom, a satellite in a distant orbit from the blazing sun of the head table. It was strategically placed next to the service entrance, where the clatter of dishes provided a welcome distraction. This was the island of misfit toys, the place for distant relatives and obligatory invites who didn't quite fit into Genevieve's perfect portrait of a perfect life. This was the place for me. I was her older sister, her only sibling, and I had been seated with a great aunt I hadn't seen in 20 years, and our parents, former neighbor, a kindly man who kept asking me if I remembered his prize-winning petunias. To them, and to everyone else here, I was Sabrina, the other, Steele daughter. Genevieve was the brilliant one, charming, radiant, the heir apparent to our father's prestigious architectural firm. I was the shadow, quiet, intense, the one who had run off, as our mother Leonora liked to put it, to join the army. In their world, I had traded the elegance of blueprints and society fundraisers for the perceived grit and grime of military life, a choice they considered both bizarre and a little pathetic. A dead end. Sabrina was always so intense. I overheard Leonora explaining to one of the guests, her voice a carefully calibrated blend of maternal affection and social regret. That army life, it changes a person, but it's steady work, I suppose. Some kind of desk job for the government, you know. A desk job. That was the narrative they had clung to for over a decade, a comforting, dismissive label. It allowed them to shrink my life into a neat, non-threatening box. They pictured me in a drab, windowless office, stamping forms in triplicate. It was convenient. It made me smaller, and their world, by comparison, feel grander. The truth was somewhat more complex. I wasn't a clerk. I was a major in the United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. I didn't stamp forms. I prosecuted war crimes, advised generals on the laws of armed conflict, and navigated the labyrinthine legal complexities that arose when national security and international law collided. My desk had been in courtrooms in Baghdad, briefing rooms at the Pentagon, and negotiation tables in The Hague. My paperwork had shaped policy and decided fates. But I never corrected them. I let them have their version. Their underestimation was my armor. The chasm that had cleaved our family in two was not a sudden event, but a slow, grinding erosion that began the day our father, Richard Steele, a man I adored, received his diagnosis: pancreatic cancer. Genevieve, ever the performer, became the doting angel, hovering at his bedside, fluffing his pillows and reading to him from the financial pages, her voice a soothing balm. I was a captain at the time, deployed in Germany, my connection to him reduced to crackling, delayed calls on a satellite phone, my voice a ghost from a world he no longer understood. When he passed, I flew home on emergency leave. The house was filled with the cloying scent of lilies and the hushed, performative whispers of mourning. The real funeral, the one where my place in the family was officially buried, took place 2 weeks later in the mahogany-paneled office of our family attorney, a man named Mr. Abernathy. The will reading was Genevieve's masterpiece. She delivered it not with a triumphant cry, but with a quiet, sorrowful sigh, as if the burden of it all was too much to bear. The architectural firm, our father's life's work, was left entirely to her. The sprawling family home, the one filled with memories of my childhood, was also hers. I was bequeathed a trust fund, a sum that was substantial enough to look generous to outsiders, but was, in reality, a pittance compared to the value of the estate. The final insult was the terms. I couldn't touch the principal until I was 50, and even then, only with Genevieve's approval as the executor. It was a golden leash. "Daddy was so worried, Sabrina," Genevieve had said, her hand resting on mine in a grotesque parody of sisterly concern. Our mother stood beside her, a silent, nodding statue of assent. "Your lifestyle, it's so unstable, always moving, always in dangerous places. He wanted to know you'd have a safety net, but the firm, it needs commitment. It needs someone who is here. He knew you couldn't provide that." It was a lie, polished to a brilliant shine. My father had been proud of my service. He kept a map in his study with pins marking every place I'd been stationed. He framed my promotion certificates. But in the final fog-filled months of his life, weakened by morphine and fear, he had been vulnerable to Genevieve's soft, insistent whispers. She had painted me as a reckless nomad, a daughter who had abandoned her family while portraying herself as the steadfast heir, the only one loyal enough to carry on his legacy. In his weakness, he had signed the papers she put in front of him. I looked at my mother, searching for an ally, a flicker of protest. I found nothing. Her eyes slid away from mine. "Genevieve is right, dear," she'd murmured, patting my other hand. "It's for the best. It's what your father wanted." In that sterile, wood-paneled room, I lost more than an inheritance. I lost my family. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. A cold, quiet calm settled over me. I looked at their faces, a united front of pity and justification, and I understood. This was a battle I couldn't win with emotion, so I chose not to fight at all. I signed the papers, walked out of that office, and never asked them for anything again. I returned to my world, a world built on a clear code of honor and an unambiguous chain of command, and I focused on my work. I built my own legacy, one promotion at a time. And now I was here, at her wedding, an exhibit in the museum of her success. The groom was a man named Robert Prescott, an army captain she'd met at a charity auction where he was the bachelor being bid on. He was handsome, with the steady gaze and ramrod posture of a career soldier. Genevieve adored showing him off, referring to him as "my hero," reveling in the reflected glory of his uniform. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. My uniform was a source of family shame. His was a status symbol. I watched them during their first dance. They were a perfect picture, gliding across the floor. But, as a professional who studied people for a living, I saw the tells. I saw the minute tightening of Robert's jaw when Genevieve laughed a little too loudly. I saw the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. He was a man of structure and integrity, a man who understood duty. Genevieve's world was one of social maneuvering and subtle cruelties. They were speaking different languages. It was a marriage destined to become a protracted negotiation of surrender. Later, the toast began. The best man told a series of bland, rehearsed anecdotes. The maid of honor cried. Then, Robert's father, a retired two-star general named Michael Prescott, took the microphone. He was an imposing figure, a man who radiated a quiet, unshakable authority. He spoke of honor, duty, and the blending of two families. Then, his eyes found me in my corner of the room. "I also want to extend a special welcome to Genevieve's sister, Sabrina," he said, his voice resonating through the ballroom. Genevieve must have briefed him, given him the sanitized version of my life. "We're told you also serve our country. On behalf of a grateful nation and our family, thank you for your service." A polite, lukewarm wave of applause rippled through the room. I felt 100 pairs of eyes turn towards me, their gazes filled with a mixture of curiosity and pity. Poor Sabrina, the soldier sister. Genevieve beamed at me from the head table, a radiant, magnanimous smile that clearly said, "See, I am generous. I acknowledge your little life." I simply nodded my thanks to the general, my face a carefully composed mask. The evening wore on. I had planned my escape, a quiet Irish goodbye before the cake was even cut, but as I was gathering my clutch, Robert, the groom, appeared at my table. He was alone. Genevieve was holding court with a circle of admirers. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. He used the term of respect automatically, a reflex ingrained from years of training. "Robert," I replied, using his first name to put him at ease. "Congratulations. It's a beautiful wedding." "Thank you, ma'am," he said again, looking uncomfortable. I didn't realize you'd be here." Genevieve mentioned her sister was a lawyer, but she wasn't specific. From across the room, Genevieve spotted us. Her perfect smile faltered for a second as she saw her new husband talking to me. She immediately began to glide towards us, her couture gown rustling like a battle standard. "Robert, darling, don't bore my sister with all your tedious army talk," she cooed, tucking her arm possessively through his. Her eyes flicked to me, sharp and dismissive. "Sabrina works a desk job, a civilian lawyer for the government. She wouldn't understand all your soldier stories." She turned her dazzling smile back to him. "This is Robert. He's a real soldier. A captain." The insult was delivered with surgical precision, designed to diminish me and elevate him, all while maintaining the facade of a loving sister. Robert went rigid. He slowly turned his head to look at his new wife. Then he looked at me. His face, trained to be impassive, was a kaleidoscope of shock, dawning horror, and disbelief. He was a captain. The rank insignia on my dress blues, which I had worn out of respect for the uniform he and his father shared, was the gold oak leaf of a major. In his world, that wasn't just a difference of one pay grade. It was a chasm of rank, experience, and authority. He had just witnessed his civilian wife publicly disrespect a senior field-grade officer. He instinctively straightened his posture, pulling his arm from Genevieve's grasp. "Genevieve," he said, his voice clipped and formal. "This is Major Steele." Genevieve blinked, utterly confused by his tone. "Yes, I know. It's my sister, Sabrina Steele. What are you talking about?" "No," Robert said, his gaze locked on me, his tone now bordering on reverent. "This is Major Sabrina Steele, JAG Corps. She was the lead prosecutor in the Fort Hood consolidated cases. I watched her oral arguments before the Armed Services Committee on C-SPAN. The silence that descended on our small corner of the ballroom was absolute. My mother, who was at the next table, froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. The great-aunt stared at me, her jaw slack. Genevieve looked as if she'd been slapped. "What? Fort Hood? What are you talking about? She's a government clerk." The voice that cut through her sputtering denial was deep and authoritative. It was General Prescott. He had overheard his son and was now standing beside our table, his expression grim and intensely focused. "Major Steele?" the general asked, his sharp eyes examining my uniform, my rank, my ribbons. "The Sabrina Steele?" I rose slowly to my feet, my movements economical and precise. I did not look at my sister or my mother. I looked at the general. I was in his world now. "Yes, sir," I said, my voice calm and steady. General Prescott held my gaze for a long moment, and then his stern expression softened into one of profound respect. "Major, it is an honor, an absolute honor, to meet you. Your brief on the Bagram contracting fraud case was a masterpiece. It's required reading at the War College now. You set the new precedent." Genevieve made a small, choking sound. She looked from the general to her husband to me, her face a mask of utter confusion and humiliation. Her meticulously crafted reality was shattering around her. "Bagram? War College? What is happening?" At last I turned my gaze to her. I looked into the eyes of the sister who had stolen my birthright and dismissed my life's work. I felt no anger. I felt no triumph. I felt only the cold, satisfying click of a lock falling into place. "You were right about one thing, Genevieve," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the sudden stillness. "I do have a desk job. It's just that my desk is wherever the army needs justice to be served. Sometimes that's a courtroom in a war zone. Sometimes it's a briefing room at the Pentagon." My mother's face was ashen. She was staring at me as if I were a stranger, a ghost who had suddenly materialized at the table, wearing her daughter's face but radiating an authority she could not comprehend. Genevieve took an involuntary step back, stumbling slightly. Her perfect wedding, her moment of ultimate triumph, had been irrevocably tarnished, and the person who had done it wasn't me. It was the truth. All her life, she had built her success on a foundation of lies about who I was. And that foundation had just crumbled in front of the two men whose respect she craved most. Her new husband and her powerful father-in-law were not looking at her. They were looking at me with awe. I need some air," she stammered, and turning, she fled the ballroom, her perfect white dress trailing behind her like a surrender flag. I was left standing in the sudden, intense spotlight. General Prescott began asking me a detailed question about international law. Robert stood by, silent and mortified. My family, the aunts and uncles and cousins, stared at me with new, uncertain eyes. I was no longer, poor Sabrina, I was someone else entirely. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I politely excused myself from the general, gave Robert a curt, professional nod, and walked away. As I passed my mother, she reached out, her hand trembling. "Sabrina, I didn't know." "Yes," I said, my voice devoid of emotion as I kept walking. That was the point. Stepping out of the stifling ballroom and into the cool, clean night air, I felt a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lift from my shoulders. I hadn't sought revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy, emotional thing. This was justice. Quiet, precise, and irrefutable. Genevieve had built her kingdom on the ashes of my inheritance. Tonight, she learned that while she was decorating her castle, I was building an empire. And my empire was real.